Happy New Year, everyone. I hope you all had a wonderful holiday season. And now, as it's the first Saturday of the month, and also the year in this case, it's once again time for me to give my regular report on all the movies and video games I've been watching or playing for the first time lately. Now, first of all, I'm sorry it's been so long since my last video. These compilations of reviews are usually spaced 2 months apart, not 6. I do have an explanation, but we'll get to that in a minute. For those who don't know, my reviews are more like very short blurbs condensed down to exactly 50 words, partly to prevent myself from rambling, and partly because I usually struggle to find more to say anyway. See my last video for a couple of examples of what happens when I do have more to say than that. There are times when I have an extra comment or two that can't quite fit within that word limit, so in those situations I include that as a sort of PS after the main review. So why have I been absent for 6 months? Well, I had intended to post a video on the 7th of September, but towards the end of August, I had one of my wisdom teeth extracted and just didn't feel up to recording any narration in the week leading up to that date, so I decided to postpone it another month. But long story short, I wasn't able to finish the video in time for the first Saturday in October, and I couldn't finish all the new reviews in time for the 2nd of November either. I'm very strict with myself in that regard. For me, it's either the scheduled day or not at all. So as I figured there wasn't much point in stopping 1 month short, eventually I just said fuck it and decided to include December in my next set of reviews as well, releasing the whole thing at the end of the year. And here we are. So I hope you'll forgive me, sit back and enjoy 6 months worth of my mini reviews. As always, let's begin with the movies I've seen in the cinema since my last video on the 6th of July. Deadpool and Wolverine. Here's where the former Fox franchises fully integrate into the MCU. For a Deadpool movie, the humor is on point, and it might also be the bloodiest yet. I don't know if it'll necessarily save or rejuvenate the MCU, but it's easily the best film of Phase 5 so far. My rating, 3.5 stars. Fly Me to the Moon. A mild comedy drama that focuses on how manipulative marketing can be, highlighting how deceit is morally dubious but sometimes necessary. It may seem like it's playing into the fake moon landing conspiracy theory, but definitely has its own twist on the idea. Overall, not bad, but nothing overly exciting. My rating, 3 stars. Longlegs. This horror film makes up in dark, oppressive atmosphere for anything it lacks in plot. I didn't predict the twists per se, but none of them surprised me. Nicolas Cage is practically unrecognizable as the titular killer, and even while working in his signature over-the-top screams, remains creepy as hell. My rating, 3.5 stars. Alien Romulus. It's been a long time since we had a good Alien movie. It's not perfect, but director Fede Alvarez handles the atmosphere and tension well, providing some truly nail-biting sequences. The characters are likable enough, their goal easily draws you in, and it sheds some new light on familiar threats. My rating, 3.5 stars. Warning, the next review covers the topic of domestic abuse, so if you personally experience this, you might want to approach this part with caution, or skip ahead to this time. It ends with us. It's not overly engrossing because the dialogue is prosaic, like a toned-down melodrama, but it builds up to a raw, provocative look at abusive relationships, emphasizing how said abuse isn't always blatant. Ryle's incidents are subtle at first, triggering Lily's PTSD, but the pivotal turning point is easily the highlight. My rating, 3.5 stars. It's remarkable how Isabella Ferrer, who plays Lily in the flashbacks, could pass for a young Blake Lively. The young Atlas, not so much. Beetlejuice. Both Beetlejuice and Burton have still got it. This sequel maintains its predecessor's eccentric gruesomeness, though fair warning it's significantly gorier than the original, and I think it's just as good overall. The second half ramps up the madness and therefore fun, although that does also affect the narrative cohesion. My rating, 3.5 stars. Afraid. Or is it supposed to be pronounced afray-eyed? Well, anyway, in theory, it's primed to capitalize on our growing fears regarding AI's presence in modern society, but the stilted dialogue and sometimes jarring editing quickly dash any suspense by rendering the family interaction shaky and the paranoia rushed and underdeveloped. Ultimately, it's a lackluster thriller that severely wastes its potential. My rating, 2 stars. The Critic. The eponymous Critic starts out as an entitled veteran, but develops into a diabolical, manipulative supervillain. Even his apparently helpful actions are tainted by selfish motives. His one heinous decision has consequences that cascade to the point of absurdity. It's undeniably a melodrama, a thoroughly pedestrian but not unbearable one. My rating, 3 stars. Blink twice. It's a fun and inventive horror outing, but I don't want to spoil too much. I recommend you go in as blind as possible. Let's just say it gives new meaning to the term toxic positivity. Everything from the sinister truth to the climax bolsters the central theme of control. My rating, 3.5 stars. Speak no evil. Paddy and Kira seem friendly and upbeat, but you know there's something off about them. When the bombshell finally drops after a few scattered hints, it leads to a climax that's so insane and yet somehow totally grounded that the tension never lets up. Overall, it's a delicious thrill ride. My rating, 4 stars. For the record, I haven't seen the original Danish version. Now I'll have to check it out to see how it compares. Megalopolis. It's not subtly presenting a modern-day version of the fall of the Roman Empire, possibly trying to comment on the fragility of the United States. Whatever Francis Ford Coppola was going for was completely lost on me, hidden behind cryptic, esoteric dialogue that makes the characters' decisions just as vague. My rating, 2 stars. Hellboy, the Crooked Man. It's not as bad as the 2019 Hellboy, but still very sloppy. Having the inciting incident in the opening scene feels like the entire first act is missing, and it provides very little context for those not familiar with Hellboy. The performances are mostly drab, especially Jefferson White as Tom. My rating, 1.5 stars. Never Let Go. The premise inspires mild suspense because you're not sure if the mysterious evil outside the house is real or if the mother is imagining it. The sons start to question it too. The child actors could have been better though, and the third act unfortunately does give a definitive answer. My rating, 3 stars. The Substance. It's a wild ride and a scathing satire of beauty standards in media and society in general. Its ultimate message is that obsessing too much over youthful beauty, or anything that you feel is not truly yourself, will only lead to self-destruction. But be warned, it's not for the squeamish. My rating, 4 stars. The Wild Robot. When a lost, directionless robot assigns herself the task of raising a newly hatched gosling, the resulting allegory for becoming a parent is plain and deeply effective. The scene where the time comes for her grown-up son to leave home is genuinely touching, but that's not the end of it. My rating, 4 stars. Honestly, my rating probably would have been higher if I weren't so annoyed with the audience I saw it with. They were laughing out loud at everything that I thought was either not funny or at best mildly amusing. I've no doubt that my opinion will climb much higher on repeat viewings. It could even potentially become my favourite movie of the year. Transformers 1. Hands down, best Transformers movie ever made. It's an entertaining dive into the origins of Cybertron and the familiar factions. It keeps the tone light-hearted, but doesn't completely treat it as a joke. My only major complaint is that D16's path to becoming Megatron could have been fleshed out better. My rating, 3.5 stars. The Apprentice. It initially portrays Donald Trump as a weak-willed idiot and Roy Cohn as the real villain, but Trump eventually becomes so unruly that even Cohn is wary of him. My immersion would always be limited given the subject matter, but I definitely respect the movie more than the man himself. My rating, 3 stars. Look Back. It's a coming-of-age story in which a perceived rivalry inspires something much greater, and the gorgeous hand-drawn animation reinforces the central theme of the challenges of creating art for a living. Unfortunately, a twist near the end turns what should be a powerful, even heart-rending message into a confusing mess. My rating, 3.5 stars. Juror number 2. The premise is fundamentally flawed. It's presented as a potent dilemma for our guilt-ridden protagonist, but realistically speaking, even I can tell it gets some basics of the legal system wrong. It occasionally seems aware of its blunders, but combined with asinine dialogue, it comes across more as infantile writing. My rating? 2.5 stars. Anora. What starts as a whirlwind romance between a stripper and an oligarch's son becomes a frantic scramble when his parents find out. The performances are top-notch, and the second half has a suitably chaotic tone that enhances the exhilaration of the search for Ivan, matching his guardian's desperate mental state. My rating? 4 stars. Heretic. Hugh Grant gives a terrific performance as a man putting 2 missionaries through a series of trials to challenge their faith. It's more a riveting battle of wits than simply a condemnation of religion, as both sides point out each other's fallacies and our host may not be entirely sane. My rating? 3.5 stars. Paddington in Peru. This sequel sees the Browns embark on a treasure hunt, and a thoroughly pedestrian and predictable one. Paddington himself is likeable as ever, but most of the performances are just awkward, as though trying too hard to be child-friendly, and it lacks the amiable charm of the first 2 movies. My rating? 3 stars. Small Things Like These. A quiet, understated movie involving the infamous Magdalene laundries. It doesn't explain the situation very well for the uninitiated, but the oppressive tone implies Bill's moral dilemma well enough. I see what would make it a powerful drama, but personally I was more intrigued by the camera work than the story. My rating? 3 stars. Gladiator 2. It has some promising ideas, like the city threatening to tear itself apart and the target of the hero's vengeance being a noble revolutionary himself, but it's little more than a retread of the first movie that just reminds you how much better it was. Ultimately, it's an unnecessary sequel. My rating? 2.5 stars. Moana 2. Another lame and unnecessary Disney sequel. It's not terrible, but none of the songs are anywhere near as memorable as the original, and Moana's goal and the main threat are much less tangible. Partly because of this insipidity, every plot beat feels like a pale imitation of the first movie. My rating? 2.5 stars. The Lord of the Rings, The War of the Rohirrim. For a story that was such a pivotal moment in Rohan's history, including inspiring the name Helm's Deep, the film itself could have been better. The characters are boring, so the dialogue is equally uninspiring. Regarding the eponymous war, expect more of a waiting game than a battle of attrition. My rating? 3 stars. So that's everything I saw in the cinema from July onwards. Next are some movies from 2024 that I watched at home, either because I missed them in the cinema or they weren't released theatrically at all. Justice League Crisis on Infinite Earths Part 1. The narrative structure is quite a mess. It's mostly just the Flash haphazardly hopping from one timeline to another, initially without explanation. The most interesting part involves a Mazo, which feels climactic enough to be the ending, but is only at the halfway point. The actual conclusion is satisfying enough, though. My rating? 2.5 stars. Justice League Crisis on Infinite Earths Part 2. Like Part 1, the storytelling has some major issues. The first half cuts between 2 characters' backstories with no rhyme or reason. Still, it advances the plot in interesting enough ways that I enjoyed it slightly more. While Part 1 focused on the Flash, this one is primarily the Monitor's story. My rating? 3 stars. Justice League Crisis on Infinite Earths Part 3. It ends not just the trilogy, but the Tomorrowverse as a whole. Like Parts 1 and 2, it has its moments, but is undeniably sloppy. There's a random action scene with dinosaurs that goes on for a considerably long time. Overall, it's a middling conclusion to a generally feeble series. My rating? 3 stars. Lisa Frankenstein. Lisa is a troubled teenager who's visited by a reanimated corpse. It's a long story. The ensuing romp is not very funny and rather awkward in terms of tone and structure. The characters' interactions never quite work, and the ending is completely insane in a way that doesn't feel earned. My rating? 2.5 stars. Drive Away Dolls. Two friends unintentionally make off with some criminal's property. It's a familiar scenario, but our two leads are more annoying than amusing, and the jokes mostly just don't land. It does get slightly smile-worthy when the absurd truth of the criminal's cargo is revealed, but not enough to fully compensate. My rating, 2 stars. Late Night with the Devil. It's a found-footage movie in a sense. The film is primarily the ill-fated broadcast itself, with behind-the-scenes footage showing what happened in the commercial breaks. The suspense and intrigue proficiently build as we discover what unfolded and why, and the ending is truly wild. Overall, it's good horror fare. My rating, 3.5 stars. Double Blind. It sounds promising on paper as the characters contend with sleep deprivation and paranoia about both the mysterious drugs in their system and each other. But the horror is completely undone as it increasingly descends into melodrama, and the hallucinations are inconsistent at best. I somehow doubt it's psychologically accurate. My rating, 2.5 stars. ISS. The production design and effects are commendable, but the story never lives up to its potential. A crew from 2 nations, each with radical orders, suspicious of each other. Maybe it's because everything's underplayed, or our perspective is completely one-sided at first, but it never takes root. It's perpetually underwhelming. My rating, 2.5 stars. The Beast. The non-linear storytelling gets extremely confusing. You easily notice the theme of reincarnation, and the stories within Gabrielle's past lives are sometimes compelling in and of themselves, but don't seem to affect the overall piece, leaving you wondering how she's aware of them and what the eponymous beast even is. My rating, 2.5 stars. It's mainly trying to comment on AI taking people's jobs and how we can adapt to that scenario, but not in a particularly relevant or thought-provoking way. Challenges. At first, the non-linear narrative works well as it spans Art and Patrick's lives, keeping you engaged in how Tashi affected them both and the different ways they matured, or didn't. But the third act is where it goes a little overboard with the flashbacks and especially the slow motion. My rating, 3.5 stars. Abigail. A kidnap victim turns out to be a vampire. It sometimes reaches the fun the premise suggests, like the group testing the typical vampire weaknesses, but overall it doesn't have much bite, partly because the swearing is so gratuitous that it's about as mature as the title character's outward appearance. My rating, 3 stars. Interestingly, of all the movies I've seen, this is now the first alphabetically, replacing the 2019 animated film Abominable. Anyone remember that one? Under Paris. It's a generally trite shark movie. It hits many familiar cliches: the traumatized protagonist, the radical environmentalist, the authority figure more concerned with an upcoming event to boost the city's publicity, but doesn't add any spice to make them fun or interesting. Except for the ending, which I won't spoil. My rating, 2 stars. Hitman. With Gary assuming multiple different roles, both he and the movie ponder how much of his personality is a facade. You know it's building up to a liar revealed scenario, but it doesn't completely play out in the cliched manner, which perfectly encapsulates the movie's overall slick but unassuming tone. My rating, 3.5 stars. Orion of the Dark. Initially, I really didn't like the premise. The idea of Orion bonding with a literal personification of darkness to overcome his fear just seemed too childish and nonsensical. It kind of makes sense in the context of what's revealed afterwards, but the film still never manages to be fully intriguing. My rating, 3 stars. Maharaja. It culminates in an incredible twist ending, but the film beforehand is a bit of a slog. It cuts between the present and the past seemingly at random, leaving you struggling to keep up. Still, it's a good story in retrospect, and every fight scene comes as a genuine surprise. My rating, 3 stars. The Ministry of Ungentlemanly Warfare. It has all the ingredients of a compelling and suspenseful espionage film. The stakes are high and they're forced to alter the plan at the last minute, yet somehow it's not overly exciting. The characters are average and the jokes often fall flat, but I can't truly pinpoint what's missing. My rating, 3 stars. Young Woman of the Sea. It successfully sets up what a trailblazer Trudy Ederle was in a very sexist time, though perhaps overplays it a bit. The overall tone is histrionic and melodramatic, and the dialogue sounds very unnatural at times. It's certainly not bad, but not worthy of such an important and influential figure. My rating, 3 stars. Love Lies Bleeding. As things progress, Lou is in danger of being in an abusive relationship like her sister. Jackie's behavior becomes just as destructive as the steroids she's taking. A deliberate metaphor, I suspect. It's a slick and tense thriller, but the ending is so nonsensical that it almost completely undermines everything. My rating, 3.5 stars. Boy Kills World. Some action scenes effectively play into Boy's not quite lucid mental state, with new threats appearing from nowhere. About the only time his deafness becomes relevant is when he can't read Benny's lips, so the latter's dialogue is pure gibberish. Overall, it's not bad, certainly energetic, but never fully captivating. My rating, 3 stars. Sting. It's an average creature feature, with an enclosed setting and plenty of practical effects to appreciate. It mostly takes itself seriously, but the funniest part is the 2 leads' names. The girl is called Charlotte, very appropriate for a spider movie, and she names the spider Sting after the Hobbit. My rating, 3 stars. The Watched, aka The Watchers. Ishana Night Shyamalan's debut feature is an unfortunate misfire. The performances are dull, and the display room scenario is just plain laughable. The truth behind The Watchers is only semi-intriguing, and the last act treats its twists like big revelations, as if they weren't blatantly telegraphed half an hour ago. My rating, 2.5 stars. Kill. It's not easy to film coherent action scenes in cramped spaces like a train, but this movie rises to the challenge. The action is fierce, energized, and almost always legible. It's not exceptional, but still an efficient thrill ride, partly thanks to the simplicity of the hero and villain's goals. My rating, 3.5 stars. Kinds of Kindness. An anthology of 3 stories, all with the same cast. It's extremely bizarre, with dialogue that often sounds methodical and unnatural, but strangely fascinating. The vignettes themselves make the title ironic. The subjects include an abusive, domineering relationship, paranoia leading to open hostility, and the dangers of joining a cult. My rating, 3.5 stars. Wolves. Watching our 2 leads argue and wind each other up brings no shortage of laughs. Their disagreements are partly why it takes so long to initially remove the body from the hotel, and Brad Pitt and George Clooney's chemistry carries the movie as things unravel and get even more complicated. My rating, 3.5 stars. Rebel Ridge. What starts as a man battling for a seemingly minor injustice spirals into a full-blown war with a corrupt police force. The whole movie feels firmly grounded, right from the early discussions of legal loopholes that, to me at least, sound realistic, which lends much credulity to the later madness. My rating, 3.5 stars. Bad Boys Ride or Die. The 4th Bad Boys movie, and definitely the one that comes closest to being good. The plot is still rife with cliches, and the camera work is sometimes too flashy for its own good, but Mike and Marcus's chemistry has never been better as they grapple with their own maturity and mortality. My rating, 3 stars. The Bike Riders. I've never got the appeal of motorcycle clubs, and this movie did nothing to change my mind. Neither the characters nor their lifestyle won me over even remotely. The only thing of mild interest is the gradual shift in tone as new faces begin to influence the club, increasingly violently. My rating, 2.5 stars. A Quiet Place Day 1. True to its title, it follows the alien invasion's immediate aftermath. Our protagonist, Sam, has terminal cancer, which creates a compelling character arc fueled by the idea of fate. Still, it lacks its predecessor's sense of build-up and sustained tension, and is repeatedly undone by the characters being blatantly stupid. My rating, 3 stars. Maxine. It continues the X-Trilogy's recurring theme of seeking stardom, while taking its shots at the predatory Hollywood system and puritanical parents. It's very much a mixed bag, with hit-and-miss acting and both awesome and awkwardly silly moments peppered throughout, making it the most uneven and weakest of the trilogy. My rating, 3 stars. Despicable Me 4. This time, Gru and his family go into hiding after a rival escapes and vows revenge. It's not the funniest of the series, and it's pretty disappointing that it doesn't pick up where DM3 left off, but it ties its seemingly disparate plot points together much better than that movie. My rating, 3 stars. I saw the TV glow. It begins with 2 misfits bonding over a TV show before becoming a mind-bending metaphor for nostalgia and people's investment in fiction. I daren't spoil the details. Still, despite its imaginative, provocative ideas, the tone is so dreary that it borders on dullness, and the ending is way too abrupt. My rating, 3 stars. Kensuke's Kingdom. I haven't read the book, but enjoyed the movie nonetheless. The animation is sublime, as is the bond that forms between Michael and Kensuke in their new isolated life, although the ape population on the island strains credulity just enough to keep the story from reaching its full emotional potential. My rating, 3.5 stars. Thelma. A normal elderly woman becoming an action hero sounds like a fun premise, but ultimately its characters and humor just weren't for me. The best joke is a more subtle one. Thelma's inspired by Tom Cruise, but ends up committing numerous crimes in her efforts to be such a hero. My rating, 3 stars. My Old Ass. 18-year-old Elliot summons a 39-year-old version of herself during a mushroom trip. Questions of plausibility aside, it's a funny and thought-provoking comedy that makes you wonder what you'd do if given the opportunity to speak to your future self, anchored by 2 terrific performances from Maisie Stella and Aubrey Plaza. My rating, 3.5 stars. The Shadow Strays. The action scenes are vigorous and brilliantly choreographed, but somewhat devoid of substance. It hints at a central theme of overcoming indoctrination, but the plot is segmented and doesn't build up in a way that fleshes it out. Its habit of introducing conflict with no preface whatsoever certainly doesn't help. My rating, 2.5 stars. Woman of the Hour. Anna Kendrick's directorial debut shows promise, even if it's not entirely my thing. Cheryl going off script on the dating game blatantly exposes the inherent sexism in both the show and society in general, although I'm conflicted on the idea that only a serial killer knows how to be respectful. My rating, 3 stars. I could honestly do a full review of this one because there's so much to comment on, like the non-linear narrative and how the horror of the killer's actions is handled. The Piano Lesson. I've no doubt the dialogue works well on stage, but on screen, at least in this instance, it comes across as overwritten and unnatural sounding. The pivotal dispute over the titular piano holds your interest because both sides have understandable reasons, but the escalating supernatural elements were a step too far. My rating, 3 stars. Cuckoo. You know something's up with the resort and the mysterious woman that apparently only Gretchen can see, but the entity's effect of repeated time loops is more confusing than intriguing. Once the truth is revealed, it leads to a frustratingly absurd second half loaded with pseudoscience and inconsistent character decisions. My rating, 2 stars. Kneecap. It could have been a straightforward drama about underdogs championing an oppressed language, but flourishes like breaking the fourth wall and overlaying the Notebook scribblings add that much more flavor by giving it the air of a diary visualized. The actual band members play themselves and are genuinely good actors. My rating, 3.5 stars. Strange Darling. A riveting thriller packed with twists and turns, sometimes even within its 6 chapters, but mainly stemming from the order in which they're placed. You're given the ideal amount of context to be hooked right from the start of each, and the latter 3 upend everything you've seen so far. My rating, 4 stars. The Outrun. I see why some would consider it a masterpiece, but I just couldn't get into it. I'm not an alcoholic, and while I understand the theory of Rona's journey in hindsight, the narrative was too disjointed for me to grasp it in the moment, save for a few select ideas. My rating, 2.5 stars. Wallace and Gromit: Vengeance Most Foul. In this feature-length sequel to my favourite Wallace and Gromit short, Feathers McGraw is back with another devious plan. I love the subtle callbacks, including familiar music cues to demonstrate his involvement. The humour is on point, and it even works in some social commentary on our over-reliance on technology. My rating? 4 stars. It's quite a coincidence that they released this the same year I looked at the game Project Zoo, which had a very similar premise, but we'll get to that later. Now for some older movies that, obviously, I also watched at home. Now, these all have a bit of a story behind why I chose them, and I think it'd be best to just explain each one as it comes up, otherwise this whole section would have a very long and front-loaded intro. First in line is the RoboCop trilogy, because another video game I'll be talking about later is RoboCop Rogue City. I'd seen the original movie before, but not the 2 sequels, so I decided to watch all 3 to make sure I was fully prepared for the game. So because I've seen it before, RoboCop 1 would normally be exempt from these reviews. I'm including my thoughts on it just for the sake of completing the trilogy. RoboCop. It never blew me away, perhaps due to the over-the-top performances, but it's definitely an above-average action movie. Not only is it violent as hell, but also significantly intelligent. The exploration of the man's remaining identity within the machine fits into its greater satire of crime prevention and overreaching corporations. My rating? 4 stars. RoboCop 2. A huge step down from the first movie. The plot has barely any focus, it's just a string of essentially random events tenuously held together by the thread of OCP preparing their master plan. It tries to recapture the original social satire and man versus machine duality, but nowhere near as effectively. My rating? 2.5 stars. RoboCop 3. It at least follows up on the Delta City plan established in the first movie, but with a tone that feels nothing like RoboCop. It tries so hard to be child-friendly that it goes out of its way to tone down the violence. Overall, it's a lame waste of time. My rating? 2 stars. Now, as for the other movies I included here, well, bear with me. I actually keep a list of all the movies I've seen, or at least rated on IMDb. I noticed I was coming up on a nice round 2,500, so I made a few preparations for reaching that milestone. First, I wanted to make sure the count was official. There were a couple of movies that I'd only half watched in my childhood, so I hadn't seen enough to give them a rating. There was All Dogs Go to Heaven and The Last Unicorn, both of which I remembered catching the second half on TV once. Actually, in the latter's case, it wasn't until years later that I even found out what it was called. And then there's Big, where I saw the first half at school one day. I thought it was about time to complete all 3 of them. There's also the Disney short The Prince and the Pauper, which I also saw as a child, but this was my first time actually giving it my full attention. All Dogs Go to Heaven. Don Bluth's animation is gorgeous as always, and it's certainly not a bad concept, an unscrupulous character learning the error of his ways. But I couldn't get into it because something about the voice acting, pacing, and flow of it all really annoyed me. Not awful, but not Bluth's best. My rating? 2.5 stars. The Last Unicorn. The premise captures your attention immediately, but that initial interest steadily lowers as the rules of the world's magic become increasingly random. I'm sure it makes more sense in the book. The lackluster animation certainly does it no favors, and the dialogue often sounds like an awkwardly direct page-to-screen translation. My rating? 2.5 stars. The Prince and the Pauper. A fun retelling of Mark Twain's classic novel with Disney characters. It hits on both title characters dreaming of a better life, then seeing the less glamorous side of each other's. Highlights include the slapstick-filled climax and the king's death scene, particularly how the latter is represented by a candle. My rating? 3.5 stars. Big. Because it's defined by awkward scenarios with occasionally horrifying implications, I was cringing far more often than laughing. But I could still recognize its wit through my own personal intense discomfort. In particular, Josh's wish is not the dream come true he expected, and his mother's reaction is perfectly understandable. My rating? 3 stars. Next is The Crow, which I initially watched in preparation for the new reboot, until I changed my mind about seeing the latter when I saw the overwhelming dislike it was getting. But regardless, here are my thoughts on the original. The Crow. It's hard not to be entranced by the gothic ambience and flashy editing, and it's peppered with memorable lines. Eric Draven is fascinating, brutal in his revenge, but actively helps the innocent. It's undeniably influenced by Tim Burton's Batman, right down to the climax taking place in a bell tower. My rating? 3.5 stars. By this point, I was only 5 movies away from reaching the big marker. I already knew what I was going to watch as number 2500, so all that was left to decide was what the 4 in between would be. Eventually, I decided to make 3 of them the Justice League Crisis on Infinite Earths trilogy, which we covered earlier. Then, for the 4th and final, I chose The Nutty Professor, the 1996 version, because for some strange reason I'd once seen the sequel on TV, but never its predecessor. I decided it was time to correct that. The Nutty Professor. Like a modern-day version of Jekyll and Hyde. While it does have its share of characters rambling and overstretching jokes, the funniest scenes involve Buddy Love being so zany and witty that you can't help but laugh with him. Not one of my favourite comedies, but easily worth repeat viewings. My rating? 3 stars. And then finally came the big 2500th. I wanted to make it something special to mark the occasion. My 1000th movie back in 2012 was The Matrix. When I reached 1500 in 2016, I settled on Watchmen, and my 2000th film rating in 2020 was Saving Private Ryan. This time I decided to go with a classic, one of the most famous and influential sci-fi films of all time. Metropolis. A highly influential classic that still captivates even just from a narrative standpoint. Its dystopian setting is dominated by extreme classism, and it's fascinating how much religious symbolism is ingrained into the proceedings. The only major hindrance is the stark contrast between the pristine footage and the previously lost content. My rating? 4 stars. So you know what this means? At this rate, in about 4 years from now, I'll hit 3,000 movies. I wonder which movie I'll end up choosing for that landmark. Anyway, now let's end this section with a horror movie that I watched for Halloween. The Lost Boys. When Michael is initiated into David's gang, the heart of the movie is his and Sam's fear and confusion at his resulting transformation. Some of the acting is just plain awful, and overall it's too corny to take seriously, but the climactic vampire battle is brimming with awesome special effects. My rating? 3 stars. I make it a tradition to see a few new horror movies every year, but due to how my viewing schedule turned out, I only went with 1 older one this year and made the other 2 A Quiet Place Day 1 and Maxine, 2 horror sequels from the current year that we covered in the last section. Which is funny because I started watching those 2024 movies in October, and many of the others were horror films as well. And that, by the way, is why I couldn't upload in November, because the first Saturday was just 2 days after Halloween. I knew I probably couldn't even finish writing the reviews by then, let alone recording and editing them. I know there are only 50 words, but I often get writer's block and have trouble articulating my thoughts, especially trying to fit them into that exact word limit. As you can see, I always manage to do so, but it does take time. Well, there you are. Those are my reasons for choosing the movies I did. From this point on, we'll be talking about the video games I've experienced for the first time. If you've been following my videos for a while, you'll know that these games are from a list I made of titles I wanted to preview because I wasn't quite sure about buying them outright. For the most part, the way I consume these games is by watching long plays to see if I'd be enticed to buy them based on what I see. You might say I'm cheating and not getting the full gameplay experience, but you'd be surprised how many games I've fallen in love with this way, including some in this very set. There are a couple of exceptions that I actually was playing myself, specifically Avatar Frontiers of Pandora and RoboCop Rogue City, but that's because I was able to buy them physically, so I could sell them again if it turned out I didn't like them. But for the games that are only available to buy digitally, I'd like to see what I'm getting into first, because I don't want to risk having to refund them, especially given how ludicrous Steam's refund policy is. Spoiler alert, but thankfully these games almost universally did convince me. The only exceptions are Pizza Tower, Ultros, and the 2 Knights games, which I won't be reviewing here because even though I did not like what I saw in the long plays, because I was just watching the games rather than playing them, it wouldn't be fair to give a negative assessment and definitively say I don't like them. Therefore, all the games I'm about to review are ones where I liked what I saw and decided I wanted to own them, with 3 exceptions. See if you can guess what they are. So without further ado, let's get started on the reviews themselves. Chained Echoes. It wears its inspiration on its sleeve. The echoes of classic RPGs are unmissable, but never distract too much from its own story. It questions whether peace after decades of war is truly viable, and the main hook is the mystery of Glenn's identity, and the voice in his head. My rating, 3.5 stars. Moon Scars. I love its art style and initial setup, but I quickly found the dialogue and therefore storytelling so vague and confusing, especially regarding who was creating whom, that I had to watch the Inhuman One's story explain video afterwards. There's just enough there that I suspect it'll grow on me. My rating, 3 stars. Avatar: Frontiers of Pandora. It's not a bad game, but it is thoroughly mediocre. The characters are boring, the story packs barely any surprises, and it didn't change my mind about Pandora being a pretty but uninteresting world. Except for the Zeswa clan. I love these guys, I want to know more about them. My rating, 3 stars. Dredge. A great game that's both tranquil and terrifying. At first, getting into the rhythm of the fishing mechanics, selling your catch and upgrading your boat is a strangely comfortable experience. But there are also Lovecraftian monsters to deal with, and exploring the world can reveal more about its fascinating backstory. My rating, 4.5 stars. For the record, I decided to watch Christopher Odd's Let's Play instead of the usual long play without commentary because I wanted to get a clearer idea of what playing this particular game felt like. But since the Let's Play got the bad ending and left very little explained, I then watched Gaming Harry's Dredge Explain video to get the full picture. Eternights. A dating sim in a pretty creative apocalypse scenario. Even when the world is ending, there's still time for romance. There's a time limit before each event is triggered, and you can only spend each day and night with one companion, so consider carefully which bonds you want to build. My rating, 3.5 stars. RoboCop: Rogue City. The story's not bad, it has Murphy's memories threaten to undo him and allows you to determine how human he sees himself. But the gameplay, for me at least, is exceedingly frustrating. Because they kept RoboCop's movements accurate, you can't run or crouch, which makes avoiding taking damage nearly impossible. My rating, 3 stars. I especially had issues with aiming the gun accurately. I imagine this isn't a problem for PC users, but I found it unusually clunky and unreliable here. I constantly missed the target, even though I never had any issues playing other FPSs with a controller. I looked it up afterwards and tried playing the first level again with the sensitivity sliders turned down to 35. It helped, so I might reevaluate the game at some point. Sea of Stars. An RPG that harkens back to the classics with gorgeous pixel art and great music. It succinctly establishes the characters and their goals, so you're quickly drawn into their adventures and the world itself. Valir and Zale may have the grand destiny, but I'd say Garl is the real hero. My rating, 4 stars. Sonic Superstars. A 2.5D homage to the classic Sonic games, not just in general design, but with a few blatant references. Its defining feature is the unique powers that each Chaos Emerald provides. Other than that, it's the little touches, like pieces of the robotic enemies falling away when you smash them. My rating, 3.5 stars. Under the Waves. Despite a relatively short main campaign, the overall presentation is spellbinding. The environments and the music fully immerse you in the underwater atmosphere, capturing both its inherent wonder and unease. I also love how its scavenging and crafting mechanics are entwined with the environmentalist theme of cleaning up the ocean. My rating, 4 stars. Maybe it's just because Quantic Dream published this game, but I couldn't help but feel that your pastimes involving a punching bag and a guitar were lifted directly from Fahrenheit. Animal Well. I love this game. Wherever you go as you explore the map, there's another ingenious but intuitive puzzle around every corner, and its unique art style adds so much more flavor. The black background ensures that the colors vividly stand out, and enhances the fear in the more unnerving moments. My rating, 4.5 stars. 9 Souls. I've heard its setting described as Taoism meets cyberpunk. It didn't captivate me much, perhaps because I know next to nothing about the former, but it's still decent. My interest steadily rose as more of the backstory was revealed. The gameplay is like a 2D Sekiro, with combat emphasizing deflection. My rating, 3 stars. Now that we're up to the games from the current year, this is where my original preview list ended, but a few other games had piqued my interest while I was going through it, so now we move on to a second, much shorter list that I tacked on to the end of the other one. Wallace and Gromit in Project Zoo. Gromit is the active protagonist, while Wallace is his usual dim-witted but inventive self. The combination of platforming and assortment of weapons is oddly reminiscent of Ratchet and Clank. It's a decent game, but with a few isolated exceptions, lacks the humor and charm that defines the character's on-screen adventures. My rating, 3 stars. Endless Ocean. This scuba diving adventure is a pleasant, relaxing experience. But there's more to it than just exploring and cataloguing animals. There's an underlying story that culminates in a satisfying ending. It unfortunately gives science the middle finger at times, notably some animals that should not be in the South Pacific. My rating, 3.5 stars. Endless Ocean 2 Adventures of the Deep, aka Endless Ocean Blue World. Unlike the first game, it has multiple maps spanning various environments across the world. However, it's less preferable overall because it seems to have a much younger audience in mind. The fantastical elements border on absurdity, and its tone is often inexcusably patronizing, like blatantly explaining away the puzzles preemptively. My rating, 3 stars. Endless Ocean Luminous. While it's pretty tedious having to reach certain goals to unlock the story missions, the total freedom to explore the area in the main sandbox mode more than sustains it. The Veiled Sea is a patchwork of life. You'll find the first 2 games' legendary creatures and even prehistoric animals. My rating, 3.5 stars. Amnesia: The Dark Descent. Its atmosphere is phenomenal. Not only does the sound design keep you on edge, but your survival depends on keeping your sanity in check by avoiding darkness and peril. Depending on how many written records you find to piece together your lost memory, you might not get the full picture. My rating, 4 stars. Amnesia: A Machine for Pigs. A major downgrade from the first game. The inventory, the lantern oil limit, the sanity system, gone. But there are no new mechanics in their stead, so it just feels stripped down. There's not even any sense of danger at first. Nothing remotely scary happens until the man-pigs show up. My rating, 2.5 stars. And again, depending on which expository records you find, you might miss important details. I had to check the Wikipedia synopsis to get the full picture. Amnesia Rebirth. It's not as bone-chilling as the original, but it still retains the same psychological intrigue. As you explore, you quickly discover that the others survived the plane crash for quite some time, so you wonder just how Tassie lost her memories and how she ended up back at the wreckage. My rating, 3.5 stars. Amnesia: The Bunker. It's a much smaller game than its predecessors, taking place entirely on one semi-open map. While you may find its short length and dissociation from the other games disappointing, it's a tense experience in its own right, with the ever-present threat of the monster and finite fuel for the generator. My rating, 3 stars. I can totally see that going up in the future, though, when I come to appreciate the game for what it is rather than what it isn't. The Unfinished Swan. It's a surreal, dreamlike journey where you progress in imaginative and intriguing ways. At first, everything is pure white, like canvas, and you throw paint to reveal the contours and find your way around. The painting theme persists as the world becomes more visible and you follow the king's backstory. My rating, 3.5 stars. Another Crab's Treasure. It's a light-hearted Souls-like that loves puns and deals with current environmental concerns to the point where microplastics are currency. I really respect its decision to have a flawed protagonist. His goals are selfish compared to everyone else's, and there's a pivotal scene where he makes things worse for everyone. My rating, 3.5 stars. Black Myth Wukong. I know very little about Journey to the West, and even though I didn't necessarily understand the events of this game, I was never discouraged from wanting to know more about the various characters that populate your journey. The dialogue often implies a rich history that successfully piqued my curiosity. My rating, 3.5 stars. Still wakes the deep. The oil rig creates a fairly oppressive atmosphere. As it collapses, you feel like any jump could be your last, and as you witness the entity's horrifying effects, you start to wonder if it's influencing you too. The gameplay loop and short length are less inspiring, but it's still good. My rating, 3.5 stars. And now let's end with a few more games that I played after I finished the preview list. The first two were just because I felt like it, and then I started going through all the oldest games on my want-to-play list. Astro's Playroom. It's not only a showcase for the features of the DualSense controller, but also a celebration of PlayStation's history. You navigate 4 worlds to collect artifacts, and each final one is a previous PlayStation console. It's all terrific fun, except for using the motion controls to steer the rocket suit. My rating, 4 stars. The Lost World Jurassic Park. You control 5 characters sequentially, 3 dinosaurs and 2 humans, in a narrative that ignores the movie and includes some unique animals. The graphics are great for the time, and it could have been a decent 3D side-scroller, but the clunky controls make your movements feel sluggish and unreliably imprecise. My rating, 3 stars. Gradius. The prototypical side-scrolling shooter remains just as fun today, if you have the patience for it. 1 hit and you're dead. If you can survive long enough to advance the power-ups until you have multiple options, you're all set. Simply put, it's easy to see why it was so influential. My rating, 4 stars. Life Force. It offers the same invigorating fun as its predecessor Gradius, but with a few differences, the most obvious being a combination of side-scrolling and overhead stages, which therefore means it's divided into levels instead of flowing continuously. According to the manual, it all takes place inside a giant space glutton. My rating, 4 stars. Clash at Demonhead. An early example of a free-roaming adventure. You can go in either direction along the numerous connected routes, which gives the impression that you're really exploring the land and makes you genuinely excited to do so. Of course, the encounters that advance the story only trigger in a certain order. My rating, 4 stars. Toe Jam and Earl. The soundtrack is funky and the gameplay is relatively calm and non-violent, but for me at least there's still something tedious about roaming around randomized levels with no guarantee of helpful power-ups. I'm sure the 2-player experience is better, but I doubt it'll ever be one of my favorite games. My rating, 3 stars. Toe Jam and Earl in Panic on Funkatron. Abandoning the original roguelike gameplay, this sequel is a more conventional platformer, though not a very appealing one. The music once again is cool, but it gets pretty monotonous collecting all the Earthlings and Lamont's favourite stuff on the side. I started to really feel its length after a while. My rating, 3 stars. I also watched long plays of games 3 and 4 while I was on it. The last game, Back in the Groove, would be the final decider on whether I kept the rest of the series at all. Well, not only did I like what I saw, it had me thinking, wow, that might actually have been better than the original. System Shock. This is the original immersive sim that pioneered countless games to follow. Certain elements really haven't aged well, but it still easily draws you into the process of roaming the station, guided only vaguely by messages from other, usually dead, characters. And of course, Showdown is a truly unforgettable antagonist. My rating, 3.5 stars. System Shock 2. Miles better than the first game, not just in terms of graphics, but gameplay and story as well. I won't spoil much, but there's a palpable fear as you're caught between 2 overbearing titans, the many killing or mutating everyone, and the returning Showdown, the AI with a god complex. My rating, 4.5 stars. System Shock 2023. It's almost pointless comparing this remake to the original. The graphics, controls, and cyberspace sections are far superior with updated technology and sensibilities. You might find the inventory management the most tedious part. There's very limited space, and it's up to you to determine whether items are disposable or essential. My rating, 4 stars. Restar. Sega pitched this as a successor to Sonic, and while the music and certain aspects of the overall design are certainly reminiscent of Sonic 3 in particular, it does stand out as a fun game in its own right. My favourite music is from the ice levels on planet Freon. My rating, 4 stars. And as a bonus, the Game Gear version. As is common with handheld ports, it pales in comparison to the original. Besides the obvious limitations in 8-bit hardware compared to its 16-bit counterpart, it replaces planets Undertow and Scorch with the new and much shorter planet Terra, and its drastic redesigns of the existing levels are a mixed bag. My rating, 3 stars. It's also worth noting that unlike the original, collecting 100 stars earns you an extra life, as if they were trying to make the comparisons to Sonic even more direct. Well, if you haven't guessed already, the Game Gear port of Restar is one of the 3 games among that lot that I didn't think were worth keeping. The other 2 are The Lost World and Avatar Frontiers of Pandora. What's funny about the latter is that I played it right around the time the Skybreaker DLC was coming out. Needless to say, I didn't bother with that either. My main reason for playing Astro's Playroom was to see if it would spark my interest in the recent follow-up, Astrobot. Obviously it did, even before the latter went on to win Game of the Year. I'm not sure why I ignored Playroom until now. I guess I just figured it'd be a simple tech demo or one of those free games that come pre-installed on PCs. So now the only Astro game I doubt I'll ever play is the original Astrobot Rescue Mission, simply because it's a VR game, and there are so few VR games I'm interested in that it hardly seems worth buying a headset. Certainly doesn't help that the PlayStation VR 2 is not backwards compatible with VR 1 games. I should also mention that I added the Unfinished Swan to the list because I love What Remains of Edith Finch, so I thought I'd check out Giant Sparrow's previous game, especially since the developers have apparently confirmed that there's a minor connection between the two. And seriously, I cannot overstate how much I loved Animal Well. I said in another video that I started this series as a sort of quest to find titles that I thought were worthy of 5 stars. Well, Animal Well is one of those treasures. And no, I'm not forgetting about Dredge and System Shock 2, those are great games too, but Animal Well is the one that came closest to a perfect 5 stars. It could well become one of my new favourite games of all time. I'm not sure what other 2024 games I'm going to end up playing and enjoying, but it's going to be hard to top Animal Well. Phew. Well, that concludes this video, but I will be uploading a sort of follow-up in the next few days, picking out the absolute best and worst movies and games that I watched or played all year. So see you then. In the meantime, feel free to like, comment, subscribe, and all that good stuff. Take care.